So welcome to what I like to call circuit training. In this video, I'm going to share with you three big things. Number one, what is circuit training? Number two, how to implement circuit training effectively. And number three, what physiological benefits you will achieve from this type of training, including what you can look out for while doing these sessions to assess your improvements. On the screen from left to right, you can see the course, cadence, time of day, speed, power, heart rate, which is perched next to power for a reason, and gradient. As we roll into the start line, let's talk about the goal of this session, which is to work our 1 hour power, our threshold zone, which is zone 4. This is a zone where your blood lactate levels spike as you start utilizing muscle glycogen stores, as you're essentially working too hard to just utilize oxygen. So you'll start to fatigue here, but if you can condition yourself to ride in this zone for long periods, you will get a lot stronger. And within zone 4, in this specific session, we're working two separate physiological systems, both our musculoskeletal and our cardiovascular systems. How do we do this? By keeping it in one gear for the entire session, which for me will be the 52 front chain ring and in the 14 gear on the rear cassette. A consistent pedal stroke and pressure on the crank is also a key to session success. However, just know that if this is your first time doing circuits, we're going to work towards zone 4, not start there. You may also like to work 2 to 3 gears initially, just to get a feel for the session, so not just the one gear, which you can work towards. And of course, before you start a session like this, you must warm up in your zones 1 and 2 for a good 20 to 30 minutes. Now, zone 4 is a critical zone to master for improved performance on the bike, but many people don't work this zone. Why is that? Well, it's actually hard to work this zone because it's grinding, especially if you do this type of training on an indoor trainer. So if you can find a cheeky little circuit in your area, one around the 10 kilometer or 6 mile mark that undulates, that would be ideal. You'll see that I have on this course a 2.5 kilometer climb, or just over, which is around 1.5 miles, on this magnificent closed road, Gindia Drive, that leads into an undulating 11 kilometer or just under 7 mile circuit. While we are working zone 4 primarily in today's workout within the circuit itself, you're going to see me lift it into my zone 5 for the first portion of this training ride. So roughly 5 minutes hovering around 400 watts, which for me is zone 5. So ideally, if you can, you have a 5-minute higher intensity burst into your zone 4 workout. Now, why would you do that? Well, I'll explain that to you in a second. What I wanted to make a point about here, as I often do with power versus heart rate comparison, is let's gauge the time it takes for me to find zone 5 with power versus heart rate as I hit the start line. And as you'll see, power is instant. I'm in zone 5 without hesitation as I officially start this session. Now, as we wait for the heart rate to catch up to zone 5, let's take a look at the definition of zone 5, which is a very important zone. That's our VO2 max zone. So VO2 max is the optimum rate at which the heart, lungs, and muscles can effectively utilize oxygen during exercise. The typical intensity is a longer style interval, say around 3 to 8 minutes. These should be severely fatiguing. And it also says average heart rate is not usually a useful measure due to the slowness of the way heart rate responds. Interesting that, because as you will see, it's going to take roughly 50 seconds, which is almost a minute, for the heart rate to reach its intended destination, which for me would be 163 beats. Now that's roughly 20% of this zone 5 effort time. Now I could have increased my heart rate a little faster if I went perhaps out of the blocks a little faster in my zone 6 or 7, but that would have severely disrupted the effectiveness of this session. I'm supposed to be in zone 5 here, not my zone 6 and 7. So back to why are we starting off this session in our zone 5? Now a lot of events, races, and even local bunch rides that you will participate in start off fast. Reason being, everyone feels fresh and often there's testosterone lurking around, so most people go out of the blocks hard, and as a result, you'll need to go with them. And if you haven't learned how to do this in training, then you'll suffer come event day. Now, as mentioned earlier, if you're just starting out in circuit training, you're not going to start at this intensity. You might start off the first 5 minutes in your bottom end zone 4, and then for the circuit component of this session, you might work in zone 3, perhaps even your bottom end zone 3, just to get used to this type of circuit training. And then, as the step ladder approach would advise, each week gets a little harder and you work towards what I'm showing you today. And even myself today, I am doing 2 laps of this circuit, working towards 3 and maybe even 4 laps when I'm really charging. So I hit the top of the climb now and I'm backing it off. I'm targeting around 330 to 350 watts. But with road undulations and maintaining one gear, my power numbers are going to jump around a little, which is to be expected, but rarely will I deviate from zone 4. What you will note though, especially keeping it in one gear, is that your cadence is going to vary. On this particular course, it's going to be anywhere between 60 to 70 cadence uphill, and then on the downhill, you're going to be anywhere between 100 to 120 cadence. Now, if you're on a circuit that has a steep decline, safety is paramount. So if it doesn't make sense to pedal during that period of the ride, don't pedal. Now, this method, i.e. working a low and a high cadence, is going to do 2 things during our workout. Number 1, we are working our musculoskeletal system during the slower cadence efforts. And number 2, we're working our cardio system during the higher cadence efforts. While these systems clearly coexist and work closely together during physical exertion, they are still considered separate. And by you working these 2 separate systems during training, you're going to have more tools at your disposal come race day. Now, an example of that is here. I'm racing at the Queensland State Road Champs in a breakaway, and there's just 2 of us up the road on this dirt climb. I was tapping severely into my cardio system here, as my heart rate would suggest, as we went up this climb. And when we get to the top of the climb, my friend that has dragged me up the climb appears to be ready for a rest. So I roll through, and I do so by using more of my muscular system. So what I did is I tapped it up a few gears, driving it over the crest, and this enabled me to rest my cardio system slightly, but still keep enough pressure on the crank using my muscular strength that I've developed in training. So just a quick safety shout out as we're rolling around this circuit. Clearly you can see I am mainly on quiet roads here with the exception of a couple of kilometers. However, doing a circuit ultimately means intersection. So while the aim here is to be on the pedals as much as possible, clearly you'll need to hop off them as you take any corners. Now, an interesting phenomenon that you will experience while doing circuit training is once you've completed lap 1, and let's say you go for lap 2 or lap 2 can often feel easier. Reason being, you're wrestling with comfort because zone 4 is called your lactate threshold zone for a reason. This is when you get a spike in blood lactate levels and your leg muscles start talking to you essentially. And if they could, they would be saying something like, "This is bloody hurting, mate. Are you sure about this?" But for some reason, after about 10 to 15 minutes of living in this zone, things appear to get a little easier. Like your legs would say to you, "Okay, I get it. We're going to be spending a little bit of time in this uncomfortable zone. So I'll settle in for a while at the very least." And as a result, if you can find a rhythm, things will start to feel a little less uncomfortable. Now, if you're heading into a second, third, or maybe even a 4th lap, what you can start to gauge is heart rate variability within each lap, essentially testing to see how you're fatiguing lap to lap. For example, at certain points of the circuit where perhaps the terrain is a little more predictable and consistent, you can start to assess changes in heart rate. As you'll see, heart rate hasn't really shifted in lap 2, which shows that I have good conditioning for a second lap. Lap 3 might be a different story though, but I'll assess that one next week. Now, if you're doing this and you see a 5 to 15 beat increase from one lap to the next, it just means you need more conditioning and you're definitely not ready to add another lap. When you start to see there being very little movement in heart rate, that's when you know you're getting stronger and perhaps it's time to add another lap. So I'm coming towards the end of lap 2 here, and what I'm going to do to finish this one off for the last 15 to 20 seconds is lift the pressure. It's actually really good training to teach your legs to elevate the pressure towards the end of a solid session when fatigue is present in your working muscles, as this will often be required in, say, an event that you're targeting, race day, or even if you're trying to beat your mates in the local bunch. So let's make sure we do this in training. Sprinting out of the saddle could be an option here, but just be wary of traffic conditions. So job's done. That was bloody tough, but man, do you feel like you've deserved a coffee after this session, and give yourself an almighty pat on the back. Let's pull up my numbers here and you'll see where I've landed. 338 watts was my average power. Now you will also have a normalized power number in most instances, which is essentially taking into consideration time off the pedals, compensating for changes in ride conditions. Now that number, as you can see, is 347 watts. Given the fact that we're pedaling for the vast majority of this session, the number is very similar for me here, and that should be your target as well. Now, take into consideration, I did spend the first couple of minutes of this session in zone 2, rolling into the start line, so my average power would have been really a touch over 340, and given my current FTP is 351 watts, this is really a solid workout. Using the stepladder approach, next week, I'm actually going to be coming back for 3 laps, and in the weeks that follow, I'll be increasing the power slightly, maybe adding in a 4th lap, and perhaps even a sprint at the end of each lap just to maintain variability. And of course, I'll be having a week off this circuit every 3rd week. I hope you enjoyed this circuit training video. Good luck with it, and please always remember to be safe.